and welcome to the Convex Conversation with me, journalist Helen Fospero. Today's guest is known in the industry as the Queen of Comedy. Dr Maria Kempinska is the founder and CEO of Jongleurs, the comedy club empire. Maria gave up her own dreams of being on stage to help launch the careers of almost every top name you can think of in her business. Izzard, Fry and Laurie, Rory Bremner, Graham Norton, Frank Skinner, Lee Mack, Paul Merton, the list goes on. Maria started the club in the 80s, aged 28, after a brief career as a drama and English teacher, and quickly became a young entrepreneur. She's a psychiatrist and a massive believer in the power of humour to help our mental health, particularly important in these challenging times. Maria, as you know, I've been really excited to talk to you today after our quick chat on the phone, and here you are. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you, Helen. It's lovely to talk to you on a really grey day. You cheer me up.
Do you know that I was gripped by the way that you told your story and had a quick chat the other day? I wish I'd been recording it. That's what I said to you at the time. And can we pretend that I've just rung you and you're telling listeners a bit about yourself in the way that you told me originally?
I was brought up from Polish parents who were refugees, prisoners of war. Both were in concentration camps or prisoner of war camps in Siberia. Then they joined the Polish Free Army when they were freed, joined the British Army in North Africa, the 8th Army, fought at Monte Cassino, and ended up getting married and having children. 6 of us lived in one room. Then we moved to a council estate just outside Watford, which that gives me my street cred. I thought I'd add that. Spent 17 years of my life on this particular council estate, which South Oxley, which I'm still a big fan of and still know some of my old neighbours. And my dream was to go into mental health, and my dream was to work in the theatre. And my father being, quite a strict Polish dad, he said the two things you're not going to go into is entertainment and mental health. So I ended up going into teaching. Although at 17, I did volunteer in a mental asylum. And I call it a mental asylum because that's what it was called in Leesden. And it was massive. It was like this old Gothic building. And they had lots of different rooms where people were sort of packed in there. And I volunteered on the women's ward, and they had a whole plethora of different styles of females there. Frankly, not all of them were, as they said, mental. They had different degrees of mental illness, and some were extreme, but not all in that ward. And there was an older lady who was blind who used to make the beds, and she used to tell me when I didn't make the bed properly. Another lady who was lovely, very petite, and she used to do up all my buttons on my jumper. And she had this habit of saying that everybody's FM. And it took me about 3 months before she told me that FM meant feeble-minded. I thought, yes, I think we're all a bit like that at times, aren't we? So I ended up going into teaching English and drama because I was a good Polish Catholic girl, doing as I was told, and hated the staff room, hated the school system, loved teaching, loved kids, but I thought this isn't for me. And ended up sort of in my 20s trying to become a performer, singer, dancer. So I worked during the day and trained myself, did loads of lessons. And in the end, I was in Edinburgh working for somebody else. He was my singing teacher's husband, who was a director. And he wrote a one-man poem. He wrote a play or a show about a poem, an extended poem. And he stormed the Edinburgh Festival. But I was the one that did all his marketing for him. And his wife was teaching me to sing. But going up to Edinburgh opened my eyes to cabaret up there and performances. And there was so much talent there. And I knew a lot of people that were talented. And I came back down to London and I just thought, right, I'm going to do this in London. And I found a venue in Battersea and thought, right, I'm going to do it for myself. I'm just going to start doing cabaret for myself. And it was in a massive venue, 300 seater. It was an old ballroom and I used to go roller discoing there. Great for dating at that time. Best way to date for me. And I thought, this place is empty. Let's see if they want to do something with a venue. So I had absolutely no money. I worked for an actor's agent at this time. And I lived in a bedsit. But I just thought, I've got to do something. And I just thought, right, that's it. I'm going to do it. So I started booking people and opened on February the 4th in 1983. And by the end of that first year, I had people like Paul Merton, had sent me his tape from when he was at university. I had Rory Bremner. I had a lot of different people that were coming to the venue. And the thing is, that saying, build it and they will come. That's exactly what happened, because there weren't that many venues you could perform in. The Comedy Store already existed, but it was a tiny, tiny space. Actually, it was an old strip club for those that ever went there, because this is the history of comedy you're going to get now. So that was great, but that was just a small space. So Jongleurs now was about 350 seats. So it was quite a big space. I'd never done anything like this before. And I included food in the price tag. But what I was good at was contacting press. And the press were brilliant with me. I must say, Time Out, the Standard did half a page. And I think they just loved the idea that something new was happening. Not so much that I was a woman, by the way, because the guy from the Standard, who later became a friend, so I forgave him, said to me as we were sitting in the empty room, and it was a beautiful ballroom, he said, "So who's the man behind this?" I know. And I just thought, okay, so get used to this, Maria. And this was my sort of first step into the world of business. But it's not just business at that time. This was pubs and clubs. All famous comedians started coming. And then TV started becoming interested. And I had the cabaret from Jongleurs in 85. Then Saturday Night Live came on a Friday and did all their run-in with Stavros, Harry Enfield, and obviously Rory Bremner, who and he was so magnificent. He was still at uni studying languages at the time. And so people used to come and do their day job and then come over and do their evening job. And people like Emma Thompson used to pop down and watch. So you had lots of famous people just dropping in. It was fantastic.
You mentioned your bedsit there. Is it true that you set up the whole business just with your overdraft?
So I went to my bank manager and I said, look, I owe somebody some money. Can you give me a loan of 300 quid? And that's what he did. And that's how I started it. And my bicycle, I thought, I've got a bicycle, so I'll sell that if he needs my money back.
And how confident in those early days, when suddenly the phone started to ring and you got some nice press, how confident did you feel that A, you'd made the right step, and B, this was going to be a success for you?
Do you know, I think in that world, you can never be confident. We're in the entertainment business. It's always tough. You never know who's going to make it. Financially, it was a nightmare. I was living sort of hand to mouth. I used to stand at the top of the stairs because there were steps leading up to the club, thinking, are the comedians going to turn up? So I used to always overbook to make sure the audience got the best shows. Audience were always appreciative. And it was always nerve-wracking because it was so new at that time, but nerve-wracking and at times exhilarating. Dilly Keane, and I remember talking to Dilly and I said, Dilly, you should wear really glamorous clothes because when you're funny and you're wearing glamorous clothes, it's even funnier. So we had a lot of all that stuff going on. And, Eddie, when he used to come in with his makeup, and Julian Collins, Joan Collins fan club and his dog, the Wonder Dog, was absolutely brilliant.
When you said it was nerve-wracking, of course, in those early days, people now that we mentioned in the introduction who are very successful household names, of course, in those days, they were unknowns or just out of university, so unknown to you too as the person who was booking them. But indulge us a bit. I mean, some of the names we mentioned, Rory Bremner's, Graham Norton, Fry and Laurie, what stories particularly stand out from those early days when you had them on stage?
Rory was just exceptional. Straight away, he was, and you could tell, you sort of get this frisson, if you like, when you're watching somebody immensely talented.
Start with Boris. I mean, the unlikely love child of Angela Merkel and Donald Trump, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, I mean, I know Nigel Farage, obviously. And it's interesting the rhythm they have, because his is like my ways. And now, the end is near, it's our face. The final curtain. As George Galloway's like tainted love, isn't he? There are times I want to get away. I want to run away.
We also had Mike Myers, by the way. Mike Myers, he did something with Hancock, Myers and Hancock, and he did Malarkey and Myers was his first one, where he did sort of a bit of improv on stage.
Oh dear, we better get you to hospital.
Doctor, will I live?
I don't know. Just lie back while I get on with the operation.
Sorry.
Scalpel. Forceps. Oh no, we're losing him. Okay, close him up.
Thanks, Doctor. That was a great operation. I feel like $1 million.
So the whole improvisational element of comedy, I really used to love. I also had a team called Omelette Broadcasting, and it ended up with Steve Steen and Jim Sweeney, who did improvisation well before improv was done on television. And obviously, you know, the process, the audience calls something out and they improvise around it. And I was told, don't do that, don't do that. People would always say, don't do this, don't do that. It's funny how people always think, and I thought, no, I quite like the idea, and put them on, and the audience loved them. So it was trial and error, so much of it. But the audience was so ready for it as well. And that was the part of the excitement.
Tell us a bit about somebody like Graham Norton, who's never off our screens at the minute. What were his early days with you like?
Well, interestingly enough, I bumped into Graham's manager a number of years afterwards. And he said, you know, Maria, without you giving Graham an opportunity, he would never have made it. And I think because Graham was just look at him. He's a naturally funny man. He's delightful. He's charming. He's funny. He's Southern Irish. He's got that, you know, lilt in his voice. He's lovable. And I put him on as compere because to be a compere for me was important to engage the audience and to make them feel warm and cuddly. And that's what he did. So he used to pick on people, you know, with the shirts, you know, a typical teacher would wear the shirt with the things around his elbows and, you know, men wearing check shirts, all that stuff, the banter between couples, you know, how much you're drinking, what they look like. And men would take each other on basically, and you'd get a conversation going. And he was brilliant at developing that.
Most actors, most musicians, most writers, they have a wanting to be liked, wanting to show off gene. And that gene is strong within them. Right. And if someone isn't talking, they think, I'll talk. This is my moment.
All this light just for me.
Yeah.
And Lee Mack's a great favourite of mine. Was Lee one of yours too?
Oh, yeah, Lee was brilliant.
I hate fancy food. People pretend to like fancy food, but they don't really like it. They just pretend. Caviar, grown inside a sturgeon. I would rather have the fish. Truffles, sniffed from the ground by an old sow. I would rather have the pig. Oysters, collected off the ocean bed by a half-naked Filipino boy.
What Jongleurs gave them was a stage to develop. So in the end, when the clubs developed, when we got the second one, we had to create a system. We were sending them out for corporate work as well. So they would get their regular pay here, and then we charge a lot more for performers in the corporate world. So we had to set up a system of asking the right question to get the right comedian in the right place, and without the comedian upsetting the corporate world. Lee was perfect for that. I mean, he was surreal, he's charming, he's witty. He could just take an idea and run with it. If you go on that trajectory, actually, of the surreal style of comedy, on the extreme end of that, you've got people like Milton Jones. Now, Milton Jones took a long time before he came on Radio 4 and has become known the way he is. He's a fantastic performer, Milton, you know, but actually I did my MA. This is how crazy my life is. On one hand, you've got the comedy and the business. On the other hand, I was doing my psychotherapy and mental health stuff. I did an MA of psychological types in stand-up comedy because I did the whole Myers-Briggs thing of, is there a certain type of comedian that does comedy? So I broke them up into the wordsmith, the surreal. I did two others, one which was somebody who uses props, and one which I put under the feeling type, which is the more coarse type of humour, you know, the ones that go on last, basically, you know, the ones that talk about relationships and intimacy and all that stuff. And it was interesting because in my intuitive part, I did the surreal comedians, which Lee Mack was obviously one of them. But you know what I found in if anybody wants to read it, contact me. It takes a bit of reading because it's, you know, sort of quite intense. But majority of comedians were introverts.
Really? That's sort of...
And I love that.
It sort of doesn't surprise me you say that, because also there's always said to be a bit of a darker side to a comedian, isn't it? It's almost like the clown and the perhaps not so happy inside. So I was interested to know what you thought to that.
Yeah, because I decided I haven't done enough. Maybe this is the Catholic in me, so, you know, a bit of mea culpa. I then did my PhD actually as the mind of a comedian, and I did touch on the depression of a comedian. Why do comedians, are they all depressed? No, they're not. But I think, do they get more depressed than others? I think that's the key. because why do they get more depressed? And I think that's because they are elevated so high on stage. The high of performance is immense, and they expose so much of themselves, because stand-up comedy, as opposed to doing one-liners of other people's material, means that you're exposing you. You're telling your story. This is me. This is what I've done. This is how my mother treated me, my father. This is my girlfriends. This is me not being able to have a relationship, or I'm ugly. If you come back to people like Jo Brand, how she went through a hard time. Poor women generally found it tougher to be a stand-up, but you're going through that and you're exposing a deeper side of yourself. You're trying to make it funny. And can you imagine two things? One is, if you're elevated on stage and the world adores you, to come off stage and there's nobody there and you go home on your own. That's one. Number two, if nobody loves you, and you've just told them your deepest fears. And everybody's going, yeah, so what?
God, I think the thought of standing up there and performing like that, as, when I perform as a presenter, but when you're performing as a presenter, you are a journalist, and you have a sort of mask of being, your profession is your mask. You're not opening yourself up in the same kind of way. I just wondered, where did Eddie Izzard fit into your study?
There's something about Eddie, there's something about people generally, I think, because I do practice as a psychotherapist, that is unique and intangible. We know that. It's like, how do you say, well, what is love? I don't know. How do you put it into words? And that's the same with people. And in the world of psychotherapy, I always introduce people to the idea of the daemon. It's your personal genius. The Greek called it your personal genius. Then how do you explore that? Now, Eddie, he lost his mother at quite a young age. And he wasn't born in this country. He was born in Aden. And then he went to live in Wales. At quite a young age in his life, he knew that he was going to be transsexual. She's got blonde hair, makeup, and so on. She has found her identity. But I think it's been a long journey to her, and how she stands out from the crowd, and actually being a stand-up gives you that ability to do that. When Eddie first started, she was doing stuff in Covent Garden, street performing, and that's how I found her. This tenacity she's got. She's relentless. She is determined. She's got a vision. She calls herself a humanist. And I'm sure part of her upbringing led her to that. Being in Aden, it's a war-torn country, very difficult. You can't come from that without having some drive. Although I have sort of touched upon the spiritual nature of life, I don't think Eddie really sees that. Part of the work I do is what I call the hero's journey. It's used in theatre, it's used in film. Joseph Campbell did a lot with Star Wars, with the hero's journey. And I think what people don't realise, who are that person that breaks through the boundaries of life and changes the perspective of people, that Eddie is the person that has done that. It's only in self-reflection would you see it, but other people can recognise it for her. And to see her doing what she's done, from a he to a she, carrying through the belief system that she's got, is phenomenal. And to be funny with it.
Well, you've queued me up very nicely. You've said to be funny with it and mentioned Star Wars. So let's have a listen to just an excerpt of a clip that I absolutely cannot stop watching. It's Eddie as a Lego version of Darth Vader in the Death Star Lego canteen.
I will have the penne alla arrabbiata. You'll need a tray. Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? This is not a game of who are you. For I am Vader. Darth Vader. Lord Vader. I can kill you with a single thought. Well, you'll still need a tray.
She is amazing, isn't she? I mean, just hysterically funny.
Do you know, when she was on the stage in the early days, she was just trying things out. She didn't have this ability. She was much more playful initially, so it wasn't as verbal. She became self-reflective, which this shows. It's that analytic side. And there was quite a lot of that exchange with other performers around, I think was much more open to that. I think when Eddie realized that she was going to be successful, she started really dabbling in that side of life. And she's very fast thinking. She constantly self-reflective, constantly aware on her role. It's not like, look at me. This isn't vanity. This is, what role do I play in the world? Who am I in the world? How do I take the step forward in the world and make the world a better place? in that respect, she plays with her material and somehow knows how to capture people. The greatest gift, isn't it, to be able to make people laugh and change their minds. And I think that's just brilliant about Eddie.
So where in your journey, Maria, did you decide that you would train in psychiatry and as a psychotherapist? How did that part of your life evolve?
Oh, I did that right from my early life, actually. I watched my parents. They were totally destroyed emotionally by the war. They'd lost a lot of their family. They were so devastated by the loss. The things they'd seen through the war was terrifying, and it was something you just can't get away from. And I watched that part of their lives break them. They were broken. But at the same time, on that depth, they also had a joy for life at the same time. So it's this juxtaposition of that, having seen so much death, so many people of their own dying and being killed, being shot. My mother was in front of a firing squad. My father's brother was murdered in Auschwitz. His other brother was murdered. So he had survivor's guilt. So we've got that one side of the story, trying to piece back their family in Poland, because Poland was under the communist regime, so they couldn't connect. So we had that. Yet we lived in South Oxy with English people that didn't understand, not a problem, but they just didn't understand what had happened. They didn't understand this part of the war. But at the same time, the great sense of humour and the British way of life. So my father worked in a factory. My mother ended up making crackers at home. We all helped her, and at Christmas, and we'd open them up and read these one-liners. And of course, what cheered everybody up was watching comedy on television. So you had the two Ronnies and people like Dave Allen, and I had the joy of meeting him. He came down to Jongleurs in the early days, Dave Allen did, and that was absolutely like a dream come true. He was one of my early favourites. So I think being the observer of people, their lives, and my mother handled the trauma, complex trauma of the war. And as a second or first generation, what people don't realize here is every generation, even though you don't experience the trauma yourself, you're the first generation of that trauma as well. So you have the residue of that. It comes in through your genes, basically, your psychological genes. And in Israel, they do a lot of studies on this. And so it affects every generation subsequently until it almost dilutes and peters out. But I was always just very aware, and I had this thing, right, I've got to do something. I've got to do something about this, whatever it is, I've got to do something. And I think that's what led me to want to be in therapy. What does it take for somebody like a Nazi to create so much damage, the whole setup, but also how do you get through that? And I wanted to understand the mindset, because some people are so resilient, they get through, they can still live their lives. And how do you do that? And I also loved the idea of performance, because it was lighthearted, it was fun, and it gave you that light and shade. And I'm so glad that I persevered, because, sort of even now, people are going through such a difficult time at the moment, and they are facing death of loved ones. And to know that you can help them reconstruct that, put them in a different way, that they go, actually, yeah, I can see my life in a different way, not only spiritually, but also use things like comedy or entertainment to cheer them up, can switch them over from feeling desperate to feeling, okay, I can handle this. And that's always been a sort of a bit of a quest of mine. So being a woman, I think, again, I've always wanted to do the work. So that's why I did my MA. I trained in healing as well, did my PhD, because I thought, well, that will make them listen.
And you wanted, like me, whatever you touch, you always want to do well, which I can imagine you wanted to do the whole gamut so that you were completely fully qualified and able to practice at the highest level you were able. It struck me in the beginning when you said that you were in a room and 6 siblings and you grew up in a very small space. Were mum and dad able to share some of those stories with you about what they went through? Were they quite open as parents, or do you feel they tried to sort of shut those thoughts out?
My mum was very open. My mum suffered an awful lot. She was an amazing woman, by the way, totally amazing, and had a great sense of humour herself. Just a quick story about that. When we lived in this council house, which was a very nice house, actually, once I'd moved from that particular room, I'll come back to that. One of my friends from college, he lived in the posh part of Watford, and he came to pick me up. We were going to a party, and he came in this souped up, sports car, cravat, and he walked into the lounge. And my mother said, so where are you going? And he said, we're going to a party. She had a Polish accent. She said, well, have a wonderful time. And he said, yes, super duper. And my mother roared with laughter, because duper in Poland is backside. So we had those moments. But yes, coming back to the room and being in there, I think that's how my mother explored what had happened with her. So I was a good listener quite early on. And it was her just telling her story over and over and over again. And I think that's what she needed. And I think that's what people need sometimes to make sense of their world. And that's fundamentally what the talking cure is about. How do you make sense of a world that's full of tragedy at times? And my father was always trying to go back to Poland. He had sisters in Poland. We actually enabled him to go back with my other sister, Barbara. They went back to Poland and he hadn't seen them for 40 years. So that was quite a big thing. So yeah, there was a lot of, sort of a lot of talk, but I always felt quite weird because at home we would have this sort of intensity of the Polish mindset of being passionate. My mother was a mathematician, by the way. So she was part of the university that first started the Enigma code.
Oh, fantastic.
I don't know how my mum coped, actually. I've got 2 kids and having 5, and she didn't have a washing machine and things like that. Yeah, I would think we were quite naughty. But at the same time, we used to help her quite a lot. So, it was the girls that used to cook, clean, used to decorate. I used to make my own clothes, all that stuff. So it was just, I never felt we were below the poverty line, as they call it today. We were always fed. We were always looked after. My mother was very careful about that. She washed and cleaned. We had shiny hair. She was a very ill woman, however. But I never felt poor. We never went on holiday, but I still never felt poor. And we had lots of clothes sent to us, but I still never felt poor.
You were probably rich in love and, wanted and appreciated,
Definitely.
Which is much more important than money. We are living through some pretty dark times, some of us more than others who have experienced people being ill or passing away with the pandemic, etc. How can we all sort of try and use comedy and humour a little more to perhaps bring some much needed lightness?
I think one is because I talk to some of my clients who've got a lot of death around them at the moment, and that in itself takes them to a very dark place. I think partially it's for people to talk about it. At the moment, we don't talk enough. We talk about the concept of death, but not the specifics of that person dying. Years ago, I used to wear a black armband, and we don't do that anymore. Let people know that you've got somebody that has been with you that has died, but also then find the best sides of them. What was funny about that? Everybody's got something funny. I did 10 minutes of stand-up, actually, in my own club, which was the best thing I ever did, the hardest and the best. And it's to find the best part of stand-up comedy, I teach people, is to self-deprecate. So it's how do you self-deprecate? Find those lines about yourself that aren't so great. Get there first. That's what I say.
I'd like to think I'm self-deprecating, but if I had £1 for every friend who's told me that I'm just not funny and I should stick to being the straight guy, it always makes me sad because I love humour and comedy and there's always lightness in my steps every day because I see the funny side usually of life. But I don't think I am funny, which is a shame because I'd like to be funny, but never mind. Just briefly back to that 28-year-old woman who'd made the leap from English and drama teacher to entrepreneur. How steep a learning curve was that, and were there tricky challenges along the way?
Loads of them. I think the biggest challenge was moving from being a person with an idea that started working. And boy, I worked. I did a full-time job and then ran up there on a Friday and set everything up and cleaned up the next day and all the rest of it. Then there was the move into the world where we took on a partner. And the whole world of the corporate world is a totally different mindset. You've got to know about contracts. You've got to understand relationships. Is it a joint venture? Are you going to get investment? What does that investment look like? It's knowing finance to the broadest extent. Then you've got to understand your clients, how to get more marketing, advertising, responding to people in the audience and getting managers in. So the whole structure had to change, and learning about the structure. That is a very, very fast learning. And the trouble is nowadays people go for what they call models in business schools. So they learn somebody else's model, but you don't have models when you're starting something new. And the world of comedy was very new. So it was like the Wild West of entertainment. And then you've got agents to deal with. You've got to negotiate. You've got to make sure that comedians do their job. You give them 20 minutes. How are they going to feel? So you've got so many different components. And boy, I had to learn quickly. And I remember talking to Linda Bennett, LK Bennett, and she built up a magnificent chain, if you remember. And we used to say how difficult it was in the boardroom. And this wasn't whinging. This isn't a case of, oh, yeah, you women can't hack it. No, the reality is in a boardroom, it's tough. You've got to know what people want, and everybody was in there for their own purposes. And if you're in there because you're doing it for a different reason, as a woman, you don't have anybody else to turn to because there aren't that many women in the boardroom in the entrepreneurial world. And I think that's what made it so hard. At the same time, I just loved the world of humour because at the end of the week, I used to be going to work and laughing. So that made up for the other very, very difficult side of business because you've got to pay everybody. I always paid every comedian that performed on my stage. So even in the early days, I didn't do a split on the door or, oh, I'm sorry, I haven't made enough. I just gave them the money to make sure that A, I could pick the comedians I wanted to pick, and B, when they performed, they'd turn up, basically.
Well, I think you learn en route. I mean, where are you now with comedy? Because I know you're doing your psychotherapy, but what role does comedy play for you?
I'm setting up an online comedy platform. So I've got some content. I'm developing that under my Dingwalls brand because I'm doing music and comedy. So can musicians be funny? Let's find out. But that's not the real reason. So I love music as well. So they're both passions of mine. So it will be a platform so that people can show who they are, get some advertising from it, market themselves, and also to make people laugh. So allowing people to develop their skills on a platform that they can be seen and the world can see them as well. So I'm making relationships with different parts of the world and just talking to people about getting other sorts of comedians involved. So yeah, very exciting.
And all this hard work was rewarded with an MBE, wasn't it?
Yes, lucky me.
How exciting.
And it was unbelievable. Actually, I was part of the Women in Business for the Duke of Edinburgh Award. And I used to go into Buckingham Palace. Actually, my other sister had already had her award, the Duke of Edinburgh Award. She went there with my mum many years before, Teresa. She was so proud. And I used to sit in there saying, look, mum, in my head, look, mum, this is where I'm at. I was in the palace. And I remember saying to Ainsley Harriott, because he performed at Jongleurs as the Calypso beat. And he said he used to do the same. He used to have these quiet words with his mother, who also passed away. But getting the MBE was amazing. And Princess Anne gave me the award. And not only, it's a great accolade because it was for business. So it was entertainment and leisure. So I was very, very pleased to receive that.
Well, it's been a pleasure chatting to you today, as predicted. And I'm thrilled to discover that I think you live about 1.5 miles away from me. So I'm hoping that we can resume this over a glass of wine or 3. What do you reckon?
Oh, I think it's definitely 4 or 5. I think you are fantastic, Helen. Thank you so much for doing this. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
It's been fantastic. Well, you've been listening to Dr Maria Kempinska MBE, founder of Jongleurs and certainly a doyen of British comedy and top lady. Thanks very much for being with us today. You can download and subscribe to our series of inspirational chats at convex.podbean.com or search The Convex Conversation on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, or just ask Alexa.